Thank you for the introduction, Fergal, and hello, everyone. In this presentation, I will focus on the future of the internet as imagined by the Solarpunk community. Now, Solarpunk is all about hopeful future visions and can be seen as a reaction to mostly dystopian and apocalyptic future scenarios dominating both in fictional literature, movies, as well as real-world debates. To illustrate what a Solarpunk internet might look like according to Solarpunk values and principles, I asked an AI tool to show me what a sustainable and socially just internet would look like. And in this image, we can see central Solarpunk elements such as green, lush nature, the use of solar and wind energy, the sun signaling hope, harmony, beauty, multi-species justice, connectivity, and also collaboration. But before diving into the realms of Solarpunk worlding, I'd like to briefly introduce my agenda. First, for those who are not familiar with Solarpunk yet, I will outline the core characteristics of the movement, mainly their optimistic resistance against dystopian thinking and despair. I will continue with the theory behind my work, which focuses on the performativity of future imaginaries, or more easily phrased, why the future makes the present. And for this presentation, I conducted a case study to find out more about what Solarpunks have to say on the future of the internet. Is it even possible to imagine a sustainable and socially just future that has the internet in it at all? And in the end, of course, I will draw my conclusion. Now, what is Solarpunk? By merely looking at this compound word, one might already get an inkling of what elements play a huge role in the Solarpunk movement. Solar refers to solar energy, but also other forms of sustainable energy generation. Punk describes their resistance to current social systems such as capitalism and colonialism. And it stands for also a call for change, because Solarpunk does not only mean to be destructive like earlier punk movements, but also very constructive. In general, Solarpunk is a speculative movement. Solarpunks ask themselves, what can a sustainable society or civilization look like, and how can we get there? There are many different forms of cultural expression that Solarpunks use to express their ideas, such as, for example, the form of fiction. And Solarpunk fiction distinguishes itself from other forms of science fiction, such as cyberpunk or steampunk. There's also Solarpunk as a style of art, architecture, and it's also a fashion style. And there's a certain visual aesthetic that they follow that can be described, for example, with inspiration taken from Art Nouveau and also from Hayao Miyazaki, who is a Japanese filmmaker known for his Studio Ghibli productions such as Spirited Away or My Neighbor Totoro. Now, what makes the movement so interesting with regards to a central imaginary is that the idea and main motivation behind it did not arise in one particular place. The idea of Solarpunk was independently developed by different people in different parts of the world, and only over the years evolved into a shared mindset and joint community. Solarpunk can be characterized as a product of the global network society, highly influenced by its post-digital, post-migrant, and transcultural characteristics. Now, this is the beginning of a table from my PhD research on the Solarpunk movement. It shows a preliminary list of categories that describe the key elements of the Solarpunk imaginary. And looking at the content of this list, one can get a good understanding of what is important for Solarpunks. Solarpunk, well, it's about hopeful people imagining futures of sustainability and social justice, then collaborating and taking action to find and share creative solutions to get closer to those imagined futures. Now, this raises the question of in how far our visions of the future have an impact on what we think and do today. Now, within our Western linear understanding of time, it is without question that the past influences the present, which of course then influences the future. Our actions in the past and our actions now have consequences. Studies on the performativity of the future have portrayed the impact of the future on the present. And some physicists and philosophers even work on the relations between the future and the past in so-called quantum entanglements. They call this retrocausality. And though highly interesting, in my opinion, we today are focusing on the performativity of the future in the present. Now, the performativity of the future describes how images of and expectations for the future structure decision-making and social organization in the present. They affect people's action, shape and coordinate social action, and thus simply through their articulation can help constitute new worlds. The performativity of the future thus describes the many ways in which representations of the future can constitute our perceived reality via the expression of language, symbols, emotions, gestures, and more. Following the evolution of the internet so far and looking at current developments, we can identify different obstacles for ecological sustainability and social justice, such as that new technologies and applications are extremely energy intensive. There's also the so-called digital divide of who gets to use the internet. And then there's the whole AI issue with its inherent bias and many more. Now one can ask themselves, how would the internet develop in a solarpunk world? Or put the solarpunk way, what can a sustainable internet look like and how can we get there? Now, in order to stay close to my research subject, this is the exact research question I chose for my case study. And I identified 3 valuable access points. First, I used discussion threads in Solarpunk online forums, mainly on Reddit, because the platform encourages public discussions on specific topics with members of a certain community, here the subreddit Solarpunk. The responses there helped me to understand the challenges and possible solutions regarding this Solarpunk internet. And the second access point is Solarpunk speculative fiction. I chose to have a look at that because I wanted to access realizations of hopeful futures in fictional worlds, imaginary worlds. And third, by looking at real-life innovations from the Solarpunk community, I could gain insights on the implementation of Solarpunk ideals within the limitations of the present. Okay, coming to the discussion threads in Solarpunk online forums. In science fiction, you can differentiate between near futures and far futures. While near futures are set in a time relatively close to the present day, far futures unfold in a more distant era. And only very few entries in the discussion threads on Reddit dealt with the far future, such as there should be no internet at all. I excluded those from my analysis as they represent notions of the internet in a radically different society. Now, for this slide, I chose one example of a response that refers to more realistic or possible changes in a near future setting regarding the infrastructure, soft and hardware, and services that together make up the internet. Now, one user said that, for example, data centers should be truly embedded, sustainable, and accountable within the region they serve. The user further explains that that means, for example, that the data center should not gobble up all renewable energy of a region and then leave people to burn coal to keep warm. Another user said that soft and hardware should be only free open source. And concerning services, I found this really interesting. They said that there should be no more centrally produced content and we should go back to the locally produced art. An important point to mention here is that, it's a limitation of my study basically. The data I used here ends in 2023 because there just weren't any other discussion threads available on this very topic of a Solarpunk internet. This has the effect though that certain newer developments, for example, in the fields of AI or such, were not really part of the discussion here. And my analysis of the discussion threads on the Solarpunk internet resulted in the following overview. One can see that the users concentrated on the technical and management aspects of the internet, not as much on social components. Central points are, for example, the sustainable energy generation and also consumption, shared power structures, non-commercial use, free access, individual data control, focus on local production of hardware, but also of art, to achieve less bandwidth use. Now, open questions that remain for me basically, for example, refer to international, global connections, relationships, whether they just are not as important anymore in those suggested solarpunk futures, because there definitely is a suggested focus here on local data traffic and also connections. Also, I wondered, what about international art productions? They suggest that we should refocus on local productions, but maybe an access would still be possible via digital libraries and local digital copies, something like that, but that's just not a big issue discussed here. Coming to my second access point, the internet and solarpunk speculative fiction. There's actually very few direct mentions of the internet in the central anthologies and novels of solarpunk. Mostly, the internet is only referred to indirectly when characters, for example, use communication devices, such as decks in A Prayer for the Crown Shy, when they pull out their pocket computer and open their mailbox, and that's it. I found one short story, though, that explicitly deals with the differences of the online and the offline world. It's Vladivostok by Avital Borwit, that was published in 2021. And during this story, well, it's actually first about two characters that want to build a digital recreation of the Amur tigers to take into an online world called Metropolis. That is an engrossing virtual reality game where he lived and worked in a place which combined all of the world's wonders into one mega city. And during the story, two perspectives emerged on what makes a good life. I named those appreciation and acceptance, and cherry picking and control. One of the characters, Maria, at one point says that 5 years ago, some nonprofit took all of these pictures of the tiger, like a digital arc. They said they wanted to keep a version for humanity. Alex shrugged at the nonprofit's efforts. We didn't get it, to be honest. A picture isn't a tiger. What we see here is that those characters actually prefer the real world, and they do see an important difference in experiencing something real and, or just the digital recreation of it. So they're really valuing what is already there. Then Brian, on the other hand, actually perceives virtual reality as more real. And he finds the freedom of being able to change every day beautiful. He explains that in Metropolis, you can be old, young, genderless, winged, tattooed, animalian, and you can change every day. He actually also fears the unpredictability of real life and says about the wild and Vladivostok, "It's foreign to me, Ronan. It's unreadable and yielding. I can't change anything about it or myself. I feel trapped." Ronan responds in that moment, though, that that's not true. You have changed even in those past few weeks, and explains or mentions a couple of things Brian has done in those past few weeks that he would have never done before. So here again, we can see that Ronan is one of those characters valuing real life and the unpredictability of it. Now, what can we take out of this for a solarpunk internet? Well, the absence of direct mentions in so many solarpunk works of fiction to me suggests that the internet and or digitality in general do not play a huge role in the imagined and desired future scenarios. The internet in Vladivostok is represented by an immersive VR game that is popular but not enjoyed by all. Both findings suggest to me that the solarpunk internet would be an optional, potentially meaningful addition or even alternative to real life. In Vladivostok, we find a stark contrast between digitality and virtual reality to actual reality, beauty, and soulfulness. Brian's preference of the virtual world is by no means criticized, though. It is simply presented as another way to see the world and be in the world, which reminded me of Escobar's concept of the pluriverse, in which there's acceptance of more than one version of reality, and thus a suggested multiplicity of worlds with different forms of life and knowing. Now we come to the third access point that tells us the story of Scuttlebutt, a decentralized social network, meaning that localized data is distributed and not stored on one central server. Okay, now what does Scuttlebutt have in common with these other websites we can see here represented by their logos? Well, they're all alternatives to established corporate social media like X, Instagram, and Facebook. Especially since Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg announced that they would significantly restrict moderation and fact-checking on Facebook and Instagram. And since Elon Musk took over Twitter and turned it into X, many people worldwide have been looking for alternatives to big corporate social media. And Scuttlebutt, together with those other examples here, they all fulfill certain characteristics of so-called alternative social media after Robert Giel. For example, they are developed by an open source community. They have decentralized and transparent structures, non-commercial goals, and anti-advertising stance. There's a focus on data protection, and have more expansive participatory cultures. But they do also require high technological literacy, and they're not as easy to use for the common person who is not, let's say, a digital expert. So yeah, Scuttlebutt, what does that actually mean? That's actually really interesting and also funny, I think. Scuttlebutt refers to water for immediate consumption on a sailing ship that was conventionally stored in a scuttlebutt. Butt means cask, so it's a butt that has been scuttled. They're making a hole in it so water could be withdrawn. So basically, Scuttlebutt is an equivalent of a water cooler in an office setting where people gather and talk. So you could say that Scuttlebutt is sea slang for gossip. And this gossip aspect is also found in the technology used for Scuttlebutt. The gossip-based approach here on the right side is an alternative to the centralized or fully overlay approach, or fully connected overlay approach, where all peers are in direct contact with one another. The gossip-based approach is a peer-to-peer communication mechanism in which nodes periodically exchange state information about themselves and about other nodes they know about. It's often used in blockchain networks, and the gossip protocol used for Scuttlebutt, it's, well, this guy called Dominic Tarr. In 2014, he was living on a sailing boat in New Zealand and was looking to develop an open source, offline-friendly protocol for social networking applications. So he developed this protocol that's the base for Scuttlebutt. And what does Scuttlebutt now have to do with Solarpunk? Well, many contributors of the Scuttlebutt open source community are from the Solarpunk crowd. It's very popular among Solarpunks as it was created really around the ethos of Solarpunk and fulfills many of typical Solarpunk values. This is a graph from 2018, so it's already a bit older, but it's the best I could find on, that could show us really how much of Scuttlebutt evolves or is about Solarpunk. It's all the dots in blue here on this graph. Yeah, and what can you do on Scuttlebutt? Well, you can basically send messages to friends, share posts on a feed, make local connections, but also go to a pub. I will explain later what that means. And special about Scuttlebutt is that there's no data harvesting at all. Users have autonomy. It's also easy to redesign when you have special uses or wishes, basically. It also works offline, which can be very beneficial, of course. And this is what I found most interesting, actually, is that it's designed around natural interaction designs. So this idea of focusing on local connections and have pubs as meeting points for long distance communication. So you can imagine, like in older times, one could go to a pub and meet travelers there, for example. And when you have a common topic of interest, you can exchange information, contact details, and stay in touch. Now, implications I take from Scuttlebutt for a Solarpunk internet, it's that platforms should be value-based, non-commercial goals. Focus should be on local connections first, long-distance connections second. And the base should be an interdependent open source community with possible individual or local adaptations. Also, data privacy and control play a huge role. And we have this aspect of things being designed around human interaction and natural surroundings. Coming to my conclusion, my summary of a solarpunk internet. Solarpunk is a polyphonic movement, so there really is no such thing as one vision of a solarpunk internet. We can orient ourselves on a scale of no internet at all to a very extreme version of, for example, a bio-based internet as a planetary symbiose, which would be a very different and very immersive development compared to what we have and know today. Most solarpunk ideas concerning a solarpunk internet can be placed in the middle, though, here represented by this colorful spectrum in the middle. A solarpunk internet here describes an optional, potentially meaningful addition to life that is sustainable and socially managed, and can include different forms of implementation regarding its local or global scale, as well as its level of immersion. And a solarpunk internet would be characterized by those elements on the right. Platforms such as Scuttlebutt would, of course, only be a small part of a solarpunk internet, but might change the way we communicate online. And as solarpunk is not only about imagining desirable futures, but most importantly about doing things now in order to get closer to such future scenarios, I put together a list of actions that would help us get there from a solarpunk point of view. I'm just going to mention a few examples. I'm not going to read out the whole list, but for example, we could buy every piece of hardware we use secondhand, see that we repair broken pieces and recycle those we cannot use anymore. And this is actually very interesting regarding the vernacular internet that was the topic earlier today already. We could also choose high quality and high density information content like in Web 1 compared to nowadays a lot of video content, many ads that we don't really want to see. So it's a lot of data being transferred that should not be necessary in every case. A big part of solarpunk activism also concerns political action and can be as simple as voting in elections, getting involved in general, and in this case, where it would make sense to support open source initiatives. Protest and resistance might in this context mean to use alternative social media and also maybe call to action, for example, to boycott certain big tech corporations. Local cooperation might mean here to organize a repair cafe or join a local makerspace, or get involved in a local Freifunk group, which is actually a German project. For those who are not familiar with it, it's about community managed decentralized mesh networks, which in the end would mean that we all have free access to Wi-Fi. Yes, and that's the end of my presentation. I'm looking forward to feedback, comments, or questions you might have. Thank you for your attention.